Chapter 5 Neurogenic Shock. Lights flickering in obtuse shapes, whirling and spinning around my eyes. I open them to find no helmet, just a hand and a flashlight. Calm voices that I couldn't understand, and pains I can barely explain. All of my ribs felt as if I had just crawled out from being asleep under a boulder. My spine twinges and twitches, lurching my body when the pain strikes, spiking my eyes with poppies of color. My skull throbbed and pulsed, my legs ached and tensed. And all around me, my world dribbled into existence. Slowly, calmly, the peace passes over me like a knife edge to the skin, barely pressing but moving quickly. Within moments, I was gored once more by my pain, a side effect from my tension. Above me were plastic masks. Behind those were faces covered in another mask, and they had tools. One of them delicately placed their finger on my tongue and forced my mouth open. It was at that moment that I realized I was actually numb, completely, from head to toe. I couldn't feel a damn thing. All I could feel was the panicked warmth in my chest from my heart's urge to palpitate and its medical prohibition from such a simple act. I heard tools clicking vaguely as iron and steel rods were placed in my maw. Were they sticking those tools into my gums? Did I still have a tongue? Rampant, discarded thoughts of grandiose and random topics started to disease and fester my brain. I tensed, or at least, I assume I did. I started to question how long I'd been there. These two would move in strange ways that made them hard to track. My thoughts rampaged forward with reckless, skin-ripping, tooth-shattering anxiety. I believed them to be ghosts. At one point, I even believed one of them to be wearing red. All effects of whatever anesthesia they gave to me, and however high the dosage was. When I fully woke, nobody was present, but I could see clearly. Looking down while getting up showed me a teal medical gown, little dark green polka dots all over it. My hands felt like cushions, and my feet felt like clouds. I swayed my skull to the side, feeling its intangible weight. My mouth was fine. It hadn't been harmed somehow. While I would have loved to have found a mirror to admire my smile with, I instead settled for collapsing on the ground and nearly shattering that smile. I managed to recoil and rise, and I took the time to regain my balance. The room I was in was undoubtedly a medical ward, one with all the latest technology. Aside from a few seemingly unorthodox tools, the entire place was most assuredly prepared for any medical emergency. Perhaps the people were too. I clambered to the door, barely keeping upright, and touched a clean glass panel to open it. A hideous squeal emitted while it opened, heavy metal with little protection on its tracks. The hall was clean, incredibly chilly. All a cold blue that fades gently into the gray-white that dominates its palette. 2 ways to go. I banked right and booked it down the hall. I passed 2 doors, and at the end of the hall was one more. Much bigger, but with a blaring red signal saying, "Out of service," on it. To my left was the central area, a living room of sorts. Comfortable chairs, large TV, a coffee table, and a small surround sound setup. There was even a half-eaten bag of chips left on one of the chairs. It felt strange, like standing on the precipice of normal. I was completely shocked, glaring at the room, simply amazed that humans even found some comfort all the way down here. Perpendicular to the entrance I came through was the other side, which had a massive bulkhead at the end and around 3 doors on either side. I approached the bulkhead to find it slightly ajar. The actual airlock had no water in it, thankfully, but there was about a 4-inch wide gap in the door's horizontal teeth. Once again, there was a hall to my left, and it connected right back to the medical room I came from. There was the dire and persistent scent of salt water mixed alongside steel. That and a fumigating scent of disinfectant masked with a tart odor of lemon. Made all the more sweeter by the cleanliness. Not a speck. At least, not here. The door off to the right of the medical room, the one at the end of the hall, it's locked down. The floor I was on was clearly the living quarters. Only one lab, and it's medical. The rest of the station and its equipment must be through that door. I pressed whatever buttons I could find. I ripped off a panel or two, and found these lovely wires that if you disconnect them and join them together, it forces the door open. This was my first mistake. The light inside flickered violently. Powerful and vicious oozing and splotching sounds. As if some vicious fluid was being regurgitated and swallowed through a powerful and obnoxious clicking sac. On the wall was a person, or what looked to be the living remains of a person, still twitching and lurching, one eye clear through the mangled twine now stitched into the metal. Half of it was recognizable, but the other half was strictly yarn. It belched, and you could hear another pressure bubble move for just a moment before a large section of her spinal column exploded from within. Fluids of barely recognizable color sprayed in a vicious arch, splattering the wall. Just as this occurred, the flesh between the wound and the yarn was slowly pulled across the metal in gruesomely organized patterns, eventually culminating in a sheer mass of person being sewn into a wall. The chunk of jaw still visible and twitching maniacally in painful discourse. No voice was heard, nor was it needed. My terror was already immense. Someone appeared from a nearby stairwell, holding a weapon. Immediately, a sharp spear penetrated the strobe-lit horror, and he began to chop it down. The sounds, like taut leather being stripped to its bare minimum and stretched to its absolute maximum. A gushy hack with the effective comparison being slicing through wet silicone brushes with a cleaver. The whiplash recoil with a slapped sound on top of every slit end. My eyes were fixated on the one untouched, as it remained so throughout. The thing was watching me. It was locked onto me before being slashed apart. The first chop made it flinch and tense with a terrible ripping sound. After that, its gaze was tossed upwards, where it continued to violently wobble and shake in response to every single break. I panicked, searching for anything to assist with the cut-down process. I scrambled around, the whole while a blurred voice screaming incoherent gibberish to me, only being interrupted by the distinct and clear sound of more hacking, more muscles, more taut flesh. I was losing my mind, completely in a whirl I couldn't see. Eventually my vision was regained, but with some distinct differences. I could see it squirming on the ground, a distant voice of a woman. Copper scent filled my lungs, and a new clarity of terrible origin began. I saw no people, just their flesh. I saw their minds and their expansion. I watched them grow and die. 3 of them. A tall woman who was frantically pursuing me with a rather poignant needle. A slightly shorter, older man violently hacking at the flesh, assisted by a larger man, both screaming as they viciously pounded the pained creature, forcing it to tense into a ball and begin to squeal. The imagery beyond this point exceeds my capacity to explain, as I believed myself to be on my deathbed. I remember waking up again afterwards, having the return to normal rush my blood back into me. I awoke on the couch in the living area I saw before. The woman was above me, long hair and a gentle voice. I couldn't understand her for the life of me. All I remember hearing was 4 words. These words I never forgot. Anomalous, independent, vessel, synthesis. They still ring out from time to time in my head. I cracked the code further on, but I still hear them how they were. I came to, finally, on that couch. Looking around, I saw nobody there, just a device on the table. One LED monitor read the word page, and on the other side was a button. I clicked it, and the monitor blinked. The word on the screen changed to wait, only to blink once more and return to its initial word. I didn't think I'd wake up with a pager next to me. I thought these people were prepared. I stood up and felt my weight on my feet, arguably the greatest sensation I had ever felt at the time. I could see clearly. My stance was only slightly wobbly, and I could hear some things. There was the rhythmic pounding of something blobby and metallic coming from behind me. I swung around to see an old man approaching me with his hands out. His mouth was moving, but what came through was only gibberish. I saw him more clearly as he approached. His hands were rough and obviously calloused to the point of solidity on the skin of the palms. Fingers of dry skin and bony structure, slightly nicked and scratched by various equipment. His arms matched his hands, though the dorsal end of his arms were mallets of steel skin. His arms were vicious and vascular. One tattoo of a rose on his right one slightly masked by his rolled-up tee underneath an overcoat. His face was gruff. He had a brilliant beard that curled neatly, tucking itself under his chin. Eyes sunken, blue, brow furrowed slightly, scratches and a scar beneath his right cheekbone. His gaze was locked on me as he expounded further in tongues, only to my confusion. Didn't take long for him to gesture at the couch, which I presumed meant to sit the hell down. I sat, and he walked in front of me. The metal sounded like ice crackling in a dome. He got into my face and began to mouth words at me while speaking a strange language. I looked at him with astonishment, as to me, his lips had been melting. I looked at him to find an expecting gaze, like there was a response I must give. "What?" I think I said, with a lengthy drone of my own voice shearing into the background as I spoke. He shook his head. Chapter 6. Communication. It didn't take a genius to say I was deaf, or at least I couldn't hear things clearly. Sounds shifted, slipped, dissipated, and disappeared. Distant mechanized footsteps and pulsating vessels filling out the interiors of the rocks are all I could hear in the empty ambience. That, alongside the growing angelic choir of beeping and buzzing electronics of various shapes, sizes, and sounds, intensified to a point beyond recognition. Every sound is jammed and encrypted with a code I'd never find. My vision was in a constant stammer. Though I could see fine, my waking consciousness was that of an old TV, being flicked through by a bored teenager. Constant flickering halted my thoughts, though the lights never changed. My eyes blacked out every so often for around half a second, demolishing whatever formless thought I happened to be contemplating on. Now and again, they'd twitch, jerking to the sides or up above, as if evading fixation. That's the appropriate description. My mind was avoiding fixation entirely. Every time I'd blink or black out, the old man was in a different position, looking at me with increasing concern. My mind was just that, a TV being flicked through, and it happened to land on one channel that I could finally fixate on. The man held out a familiar patch, one I was wearing, a red Derelict patch, with our moniker, the blue rose, and the words, Flos Occidere, encircling it. I nodded, revealing my badge, and the man's head hung in disappointment once more. He started to move in much clearer motions. I could blink, and he didn't change positions. Slowly my mind was turning on, but not my hearing. A shrill and wobbly sound emitted from behind me, followed by an intense growl. Two individuals made themselves clear and present, the tall lady and the tall man. The man used some device to scan the interior of my skin, and the lady began to speak with the older gentleman. Surreal doesn't even begin to describe this. My assignment was to assist the inhabitants in recovering from a latent disaster, and to help them crack into one of the two anomalies present here. Here I am, anomalously affected to the point of incoherent deafness. The man scanning me showed the screen of his device. It claimed my skin had 12% malo infection. I looked up to him with concern. His face was young, but masked by a cap that cast a rather dense shadow. Long, light brown hair that's untamed and stringy. Two bulbous eyes and a reassuring smirk cast back at me. The lady was kind enough to grab my arm and yank me away to the medical bay with the other two in tow, discussing things. The squeaky clean floors made all the more bright by the fluorescent bulbs above me gave me a strange comfort. The lady sat me down, grabbed some pieces of paper and some pencils, and began to write hurriedly. The other two entered the room, and she swiftly gave them some of the pieces of paper. The veteran held one and took the liberty of going first, flipped the slip around. I saw the name Ron written on it, with a nearby gesture, pointing to himself. I nodded, looking to the taller, younger man who flipped his paper around to reveal Maxie written on it. The lady went last. She flipped her first card, which revealed her name to be Elsa. And with a smile, she flipped the other one over, with it reading, "We need to scan your head," in cheery, almost hauntingly sweet handwriting. She quickly wrote down on another card, "What can you hear?" as she passed me a piece of paper and the pencil. I wrote down the most apt description I could for exactly how they sounded as they talked, and the ambient noises I'm suddenly privy to. While I did this, Elsa readied one of the machines, and Maxie ran off somewhere. Ron remained by. He was examining me. I assumed it made him a tad bit irritated to see a new derelict down here. To think, too, he's gotten to be so old. that's such a rarity in this program. Completely against statistics. Our line of work is terrifyingly high stakes. We sometimes are dropped on planets where we are expected to wage a war with a god. On lighter days, we're exposed to human flesh mutating on the spot, creatures capable of annihilating planets, weapons of extraordinarily mass destruction laying dormant for years with a need for deactivation. Not only that, but even with a clean record like mine, no injuries, that is, your chances of making it past 40 in this line of work is pretty much nil. I couldn't decipher by just looking at him, but he appeared to be in his 60s. White hair trimmed down to the scalp, gruff beard with a hunch in his back, 1,000-yard stare with cold eyes. I'd never seen a veteran derelict before. Hell, some are expected to die during training, especially trauma protocol. Eventually, Elsa snatched the paper out of my hands and began examining it. The whole while, she brought a terrifying, ceiling-mounted helmet over to me. Thrice the size of my head, it had all manner of probes and electrodes seemingly hot-jacked into position. The only comfort were 4 leather straps that kept the metal mass from breaking your neck. She put it on my skull, tight fit, but it worked. The machine clicked on, and I swear to God I could hear the electricity travel through its wires and ignite its mechanized joints. Just above my skull was a careful yet quick oscillation, like someone using a corkscrew on your cranium. To my right, calculated and careful clicking noises, with gentle taps and presses to my scalp. Off to my left was the growing murmur of computational engineering, deafened in comparison to the rest. And on the back of the helmet was the dim crackle of electricity, traveling through what I can only hope to be this thing's main line. To put it simply, this helmet shows you the 8th circle of hell. And when it was removed, I was filled with immediate relief. Then, terror. The helmet was still processing what it had found, and it streamed the information to a nearby wall-mounted monitor. Looking at the screen, I couldn't tell you anything. It was a mess of various measurements and calculations. Soon, the screen read the word, tracing. Another paper was given to me. Pardon the wait, we're looking for traces of anomalies. Then another. Your eardrums have small amount of mallow on them. I looked down at the paper in shock, then back up at her with confusion. She sighed, grabbed a full sheet of paper, and began writing diligently. Her hands were delicate, rocking across the paper as if no pencil was present. She seemingly painted words. Her face was incredibly young, rounded, yet fierce, brilliant blue eyes. Her hair draped just below the ears in a rather solid A-line, and upon her nose rested a pair of librarian-esque glasses. I searched her outfit for a clue. Was she also a derelict? This was proven wrong when I saw no patch on her right arm, rather one on her left. Black patch, red cross. She may be from the same company, but she's definitely no derelict. Perhaps a healer. Maxie re-entered the room with a couple files and a larger cryogenic canister tucked awkwardly under his arm. I looked up and down his outfit as well. He did have a patch, but it was incredibly unfamiliar. Bright white background, black text. GoSoak. I never heard of them. OMIC. Hammer and slate. Sun, but not GoSoak. I pointed at the patch, and Maxie pulled it forward, examining it. Swiftly then he snatched a pencil and began jotting down as well. I looked at the veteran, whose eyes became fixated on my own badge, The first to finish writing was Elsa. She handed me a paper full of brilliant scriptures, describing exactly how my eardrum came into contact with and eventually sought symbiosis with the Mallow. Supposedly, the suit I was wearing wasn't built to survive here, let alone come into contact with Mallow, passed right through the fabric on my neck, or perhaps it weaseled its way through my helmet. After it latches onto the skin, its anomalous properties are nearly instantly revealed. It begins to inchworm its way towards any organ it can find. In reality, the specimen picks a direction and starts investigating. Eventually, most people have the Mallow make its way to their heart or other organs. Down here, cuts and wounds are commonplace, and the parasite will not go for distant or hard-to-find organs. She stated that not only is it rare for the Mallow to ignore my primary organs, but it's never been seen within the eardrum. She also claimed that there was a good chance it was in my teeth and mouth, hence the examination from earlier, though further testing was required. Finally, the paper ended off with a quick statement. I'm a nurse, but I've been working with anomalies since the beginning of my career. You're in safe hands. Arguably, the nicest thing I had heard in ages. The second page came to me, describing a company called GoSoak that apparently does commercial-grade shipping across the galaxy, delivering everything from handheld electronics to knickknacks to weaponry and living bodies. Maxie here has been with GoSoak for a number of years, though he didn't specify, and he was incredibly willing to describe his reasons for being under here as one of their employees. He got offered by OMIC, the ones running this base now, an unearthly sum of cash if he lent his talents to their base. Being honest, I've heard of the same thing myself. I was offered a pay of around 400k, which sounded great until I was halfway through training, and they told me they spent most of it on my training process. I ended up walking away with only 120k, and that's not counting how much this mission cost for the company. God forbid they know what happened to the ship I crashed on. The nurse began typing on her keyboard with obscene speed, clicking a number of times before the audible sound of a printer came into line. She waited by the printer, clicking her slightly long, well-maintained nails together and tapping her toe over and over. She tore the paper from the machine's grasp and pored over it while Ron took a strange scanner to the side of my head. It beeped a succession of clearly different toned beeps, then he pulled it away. His face was concerned, but it was that resting concern most old people obtain after the years. He murmured some gibberish, and it was replied to with even more from Elsa. Being unable to understand things, but able to hear, is strange, like being able to see without definition. The next thing handed to me was a notepad, a full one, with a torn-out sheet resting on top with writing on it. It read, "The Mallow has infected further than we assumed, but it diverted down a path we haven't seen before. Regularly, it spreads to various organs in the body, taking them over and eventually repurposing them. This begins in the blood vessels. If it reaches your heart, it'll be 10 times harder to get out, and it quietly seeps through your organs so you're none the wiser until the worst. Best indicator is darker, thicker blood. Now this is what we assumed would happen, but after it infected your eardrum, for some reason it chose to continue through your bone mass of all things. It stretched all the way up the side of your skull and wrapped around your right cheekbone. While it may spread into your ocular cavity, it's thus far avoided joints and pinches on your skull, so it's been traveling along the smooth face of bone. It's easy to see once it's under the right light, but with enough antibiotics or bacteriophage treatment, you'll be good as new soon enough. The delicate hand of Elsa flipped the page as soon as my eyes met the final mark. Your hearing is a coin flip now, though. We cannot guarantee that it'll be saved. If we get the mallow off, it'll have to be through scraping, and that's not a procedure I want to do on you. It'll certainly remove the mallow and free you of its risks. But it'll also risk removal of over 78% of your hearing. The mallow isn't progressing aggressively with you, which is completely unheard of. If we give you antibiotics, we risk disturbing it. If we give you bacteriophage treatment, we won't kill it outright. We inject bacteriophages into your spine and let it get to work fighting the mallow. So the treatment will be used to protect and secure your vital organs. Used to recover your eardrum, hopefully. But it will not be able to fight the mallow if it keeps spreading through just the bone, and we'll need to monitor it closely. The treatment will just keep it from spreading into your organs, which admonishes its only form of weaponizing itself. My eyes fluttered at the brutal honesty on display. The realization that this isn't a joke. These people were genuinely waging life and death with the planet and wanted to spend their time helping me. They're serious, an honest crew. These people should have been the ones I was sent down here with to start. They handed me a pencil, and my mind fell completely apart. I was shattered from the moment its wooden body touched my hand. I glared at the paper without motion, captivated by its perfectly printed baby blue lines. I wrote down the only 3 words that I could think of. Let's do it.